a blank wall to a wall.
Why are blank walls better? Why is it that governments all over the world prefer a blank wall to a wall that has been written on by a citizen? Where do the laws and the rules and the problems around graffiti come from? Who were the first graffiti artists and what were they doing? And is modern graffiti or examples of modern illegal public art, do they all follow a formula now which was sort of solidified in the 80s with spray cans? Has there been any genuine innovation or any genuine change that warrants a defense of public art? When I see a Banksy stencil or a Banksy imitation, I am not particularly moved. Is that Banksy stencil doing much more than making a individual statement? Is it speaking to me, or is it speaking of itself? Is it that original to put a sticker on a crossing? Is it that clever or difficult to do a paste up? Is anything really being risked when a privileged art student goes out and sticks stuff on the wall? And should we really be asking these questions based on whether somebody is already privileged or not? Shouldn't we be talking about it in terms of how it's received? If something is illegal, then isn't it illegal anyway? And if somebody is punished, then aren't they punished, regardless of what their background is? And what is the result of graffiti anyway? What happens once it's up? What is it? Purely aesthetic? Is it just to make things beautiful, or is it political? Isn't it strange that we live in a country where we have no ownership whatsoever over public spaces? Isn't it an odd thing that all of the property in this country, or in many countries, is owned by a very tiny percentage of people? Where do those property rights come from? Why are they allowed to have it and not us? And why can they make rules and not us? How do I gain ownership over the places that I live in? Why am I excluded from this? And why is it that by entering a certain class, by becoming a property owner, I suddenly don't want anybody else to do anything to the buildings that I own? Why is it that the areas that are the most dilapidated and the most graffitied and the most neglected are also the areas that have the most abundant artistic life? And why is it that those areas are then the areas that attract the very people who dislike graffiti and mess and noise? Why is it those areas become exciting and interesting? Is it true that art and culture, the art and culture of a country, is made by its poor and not by its rich? Is the narrative that we have of the sort of starving artist or the rebel gang going forth and making their art and then moving into the mainstream, is that narrative necessarily true? Are we part of that narrative? And if we're part of it, are we too self-conscious to actually make any kind of difference? And what kind of difference are we trying to make anyway when we put up something against a wall, when we put a paste up, or when we spray our names? And what about the gang activity related to graffiti? Is that something that we want to be associated with? And doesn't it beg the greater question of what would actually happen if our state did collapse? We don't necessarily agree with everything our state does or our government does, but what if everything was to fall into other hands? Are there worse people than the people who are currently in power? Is that the way we should even be thinking about politics? Should we be thinking about politics in terms of we have the least bad people, or should we be thinking about it in terms of we ought to be taking power for ourselves? And what is it that governments love so much about blank walls? Why is it a blank wall with no writing is somehow cleaner or safer? Is there something insidious going on? Is there something strange about a city that on the one hand exercises its authority over its citizens, and yet on the other hand tries to act as if that authority isn't there? Isn't the whitewashing of buildings, the kind of keeping clean of buildings, the constant destruction of buildings, just another form of control? And isn't it a form of control that is all the more dangerous because when we look at it, we just see blankness. We don't see it for what it is. Doesn't graffiti pierce that illusion? Doesn't it suggest that there's a kind of another way, that it's actually a paper wall that can be smashed down? Isn't it a kind of mark, not only to show that the person was there, but to show that this is potentially a target? And doesn't the aesthetic, the kind of white aesthetic, in some ways highlight that? Doesn't it make graffiti more dangerous when it's put against a wall that is completely white? Doesn't it make it more conspicuous and therefore even more illegal looking because it stands out against the kind of uniformity and cleanliness in inverted commas of the rest of the city? And what are we supposed to do about this? What kind of sacrifices is an individual supposed to make anyway when it comes to this issue? If we do nothing, then does it matter? Does it matter that writing on a wall, which to many people I think seems like a fairly innocuous act, at least it's an act of freedom anyway, if we do nothing, should that remain illegal? Should it be illegal? Should it be a punishable offence to make a mark on a wall?